Now we are ready to knit the ribbing that makes the brim of the hat. So our cast on is complete. We have this little bit dangling down, which we're just going to leave for now. And we're going to do knit 2, purl 1 ribbing all the way around. I usually wrap 2 and knit them off at the same time, but it's okay if you like to go stitch by stitch. Now it's time for a knit 1. Purl, 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 purl. Purl 1. Go into the stitch from the top, spin the hook around or loop it to catch the working yarn. Bring it up through the last stitch, stitch off the peg, and new stitch on the peg. And here is where I think new knitters frequently end up with sloppy ribbing. That stitch might have grown just a hair while I was resetting it, so all you have to do is tighten up. Not so much that next row will be hard to knit off, but enough to get rid of any slack. Now I'm going to do these one at a time, as some of you will prefer to do. Wrap 1, knit over, and that allows you to tighten your knit stitches too. I find mine are tight enough without that step, but we all do things a little differently. And now time for a purl. Why did I select knit 2, purl 1 ribbing? Because new knitters tend to find the purl stitch challenging and tiring. I did myself. It's been a while since I was new, but I clearly remember it. And this ribbing does pull in, does keep the edge from rolling, and yet takes the minimum number of purl stitches to get the job done. Everything about this pattern was selected with that in mind, doing a successful job that looks nice but is not difficult. Alternate way to purl. It accomplishes the same thing. We go down from the top, pull the working yarn up through the existing stitch, lift off the peg, replace, tighten. Some people find the purling hook makes it a bit easier. I hated this purling hook at first until an experienced kiss knitter shared with me the secret. If you notice, this is not the way it arrived. It's bent. That's not an accident. She said I'd get a better angle if I bent it back. And she bends hers more than this even. Anyway, for me, this was enough to make all the difference. I could get it inserted and tipped back without catching any strands of yarn I didn't want to. Now at the corners, this is your most likely place to get uneven stitching. So just make sure that you've tightened up, but not more than the other stitches. Your hands have to get used to what it feels like to keep the tension even. And there is nothing that will achieve that like practice. So now that you have time to practice, just go around seeing what works the best. While we're ribbing, I want to talk to you about knitting and success and failure and charity knitting, because to me it all goes together. First of all, nobody ever was born good at anything, knitting included. People tend to imagine it's an X chromosome thing, but it's not. Every knitter in the history of the world practiced. And the good ones practiced a lot, and that's the difference. Yes, some people have some natural affinity towards some skills, but practice is always required. So if you are fumbling, it is not because you lack talent. It is because you haven't practiced enough. If your early attempts are failures, that's you and everyone else in the history of the world. Do not be mortified, humiliated, feel like you can't do it. Hear the voices in your head of critical adults in your past. Just keep trying. take a little break, and try some more. Now, with that in mind, every attempt is good for something. It was at least a learning experience. It may be a dust rag. That's okay. But by the time you get to the point where you're making something that is a hat, but you're not impressed with it, consider this. Many people in the world are desperate for any hat whatsoever. And imperfect attempts, not embarrassingly hideous wouldn't stay on the head attempts, but ones with imperfections are very welcome to charities. I work with one called Keeping Maine Warm. The story behind that is that I do machine knitting design for the Country Knitting of Maine News and Views magazine. It's run by my friend, Linda Williams, who was sad and horrified to discover how many children in her daughter's school, her daughter's a teacher, came to school in the winter in Maine hatless and mittenless. And she was determined to do something about it. And thus, she came up with the Keeping Maine Warm hat contest, in which people enter their hats from plain to fancy, from the first simple halting attempts to elaborate professional work. And all the hats are donated. We don't get them back. I try to donate quite a number every year, but to be fair, some of mine are machine knitted, and that goes faster. However, because I also loom knit, Linda and I created a category in which I give a prize for the loom knitted hats. Knitting related companies all over the place donate prizes, so even though you don't get your hats back, you may very well get a reward. Therefore, loom knitters who want to keep practicing this really basic pattern and have fully outfitted their own households might consider sending some donations to the Keeping Maine Warm charity. I will put a link in the program notes so you can find it easily. And be sure to identify your hats as loom knitted to qualify for the loom knitting prize. We keep going on like this, knit 2, purl 1, and you will have seen me as I work doing various ways of altering the pace. You can wrap stitch by stitch, or you can wrap your 2 knit stitches, knit them off, and then work your purl stitch, or you can do them in groups of 3, as I just did, which is wrap those that will be knits and work your purl stitch. This time I'm using the purling tool, and then come back and knit over your knits. We want 4 rows of this ripping. That's the amount that I've determined is enough to do a really good job as a hat brim without going overboard and taking more time and stress on your hands than necessary. I have other loom knitting patterns and books in my Ravelry store, which is what you see here, and they'll help keep you busy and healthy throughout the crisis. Hopefully we can knit along and keep our spirits up, our tempers in check, be nice to everybody in our households, and have a good time while the crisis passes outside. Tomorrow we'll move on to the main portion of the hat. See you then.